Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10, broadcasting on Channels Television, live from Lagos. Now let's return to our lead story tonight. Oil marketers have agreed to make petroleum products available in the country immediately, and the National Union of Road Transport Workers has also agreed to start lifting petroleum products in a matter of hours. These agreements were reached at a meeting initiated by the Senate Committees on Petroleum Upstream and Downstream today to find solutions to the fuel crisis in the country.
The challenge facing this country today, as far as this issue of fuel subsidy and availability of products, because that's actually what is bringing us here this morning, is concerned, is taking on a dimension that I personally consider alarming.
The fuel crisis is not only alarming to the chairman of the Senate Committee on Petroleum, but to many Nigerians across the country. The situation has been getting worse by affecting banks, mobile telephone companies, and even schools who have had to scale down operations because of a difficulty in getting fuel. At this meeting, initiated by the Senate Committees on Upstream and Downstream, the major stakeholders in the petroleum sector met to find solutions to this problem. But in finding solutions, they first aired their grievances.
So these are the questions that we have to ask. One, why did marketers not fulfill their promise made on national television to supply fuel after they got their last payment of 154 billion? If they don't have fuel to supply, why is the black market so full of fuel? Selling at very exorbitant prices. Three, as I said before, if they didn't go shut down the whole country when they were being owed 1.3 trillion, why are they shutting the country down when they say they are owed 200 billion, of which 159 billion is on verified claims?
At the peak of the challenges we have, challenges when banks refuse to extend their lines of credit to us. And I want to say it openly here that we did not get that assistance from the banks. In other words, there was no way we could import. We are owing them, and they said we should pay back.
A visibly disgruntled Minister of Finance further had this to say about the situation.
There is a deliberate attempt to sabotage this economy and bring it to a halt and a standstill. I know I'm saying very strong words, but there's now Nigerians have to know the truth, because some of the things that happen in this country are inexplicable.
However, after the back and forth between the finance minister and representatives of the oil workers and marketers, they finally reached an agreement.
The first is that the Minister of Finance will give an undertaking to the major marketers and DAPMAN that the work of that committee being headed by the CBN will be concluded. If it is concluded, PPPRA, yes, and CBN will be concluded in verifying the outstanding claims. If it is concluded before the end of the life of it as this administration, it will be reflected in the handover notes. If it is not concluded before the end of the life of this administration, then the fact that such a committee is set up and working will be reflected in the handover notes, and a copy of the letter conveying the existence of this committee will be sent to Moman and Dapman, and also a copy will be sent to us in this committee. So on the basis of that agreement, Moman will offer whatever cooperation that is needed to enable lifting of products nationwide to begin within the next 6 hours. We have also agreed with DPRO that any depot that has products and fails to begin lifting within the next 6 hours should have their license revoked immediately.
The agreement reached by government, the petroleum marketers, and other stakeholders in the sector came as a relief to Nigerians who have had to contend with rising cost of transportation, epileptic power supply, and long queues to buy fuel. But the fuel crisis is a multi-dimensional problem, and one which would simply not go away despite the agreements reached. Linda Akibe, Channels Television News.
I'm now being joined on the news at 10 by Mr. Bismarck Riwani, an economist. You're welcome to the news at 10.
Yeah, good evening.
Well, Nigerians have had a harrowing time lately. Limited access, if any, to petroleum products. But what is the cost to the economy of fuel scarcity?
The cost is determined two ways. One, output restriction and output curtailment, which is, it comes to $1.4 billion a day, total for the 5 days about $7 billion, or 1.3% of the total GDP of the year of the country.
$7
billion. And how do you calculate this? $510 billion is what you have for a year. Divided by 365, you come out with $1.4 billion a day. For 5 days, you get $7 billion. That's the cost.
Well, you're talking about what is the cost. Now, who is really bearing the brunt of this cost?
The Nigerian people. Because one is that's output curtailment. But then there's also the linkages. The integrated cost is that things are disrupted. Airlines cannot fly, telcos are shutting down base stations, banks are closing earlier, power supply is totally out of the question, there's no diesel, and road haulage is affected. So when you take the integrated cost, it's much more than that. And this is 1.3% of GDP. In the first quarter, Nigeria's GDP fell by 2%. So in these 5 days alone, you've already accomplished a reduction in your GDP of 1.3% in 5 days. I want you to think about the full impact, because you're not getting out of it tomorrow. It's going to take a few days before things get back to normal. And so the question is, why do we have to get to this situation?
And how? How did we get to this situation?
Well, there are two angles. One is these marketers have us over a barrel. You know, we have a system, we have a structural weakness where we are dependent on importers to bring in products. We import something like 750,000 metric tons per quarter, apart from the swap arrangements. And this is significantly higher than what Nigeria can actually absorb in any time. So to a large extent, this thing is fraudulent, right? It is exaggerated, it's bloated. So what is the true demand of the Nigerian economy? I think it's much lower than that. It's about 20 or 25% lower than that. But they know, the marketers know that they have an arrangement with the government that if in 45 days of issuing the sovereign debt note, any material alteration takes place to interest rates or exchange rate, the differential will be covered by the government. That arrangement is a kind of SLA between the government and an MOU, more or less, with the marketers.
Does that, I'm sorry, does that account for the 200 billion naira that is allegedly owed the oil marketers?
No, there's 159 billion naira being owed as a result of the exchange rate differential and interest rate expense, extra expense. That is what they claim. The Federal Minister of Finance says that is not true. So it's a subject of dispute. But unfortunately, it's happening a few days to the end of one administration into the other. So they have us over the barrel, and they know that one, we have to get these products in. Two, even if you get the products in, what's going to happen in the days to come? So they want a commitment for the next tranche, which is maybe another month, so they can have this last party before the transparency and the openness and this strict adherence to proper governance comes in the next dispensation, which will start on Friday.
So are you suggesting that the figure of 200 billion is not real?
No, I'm not saying it's not real. You see, the truth is that it is exaggerated. Okay. And to a large extent, there are claims. So if there's a dispute in claims, you go and resolve it. But you don't have time. The point is that you have only 3 days, and they want to have as much as they can get immediately. After that, all bets are off. So that's the real issue that we have to face.
Okay, well, now we have 3-4 days before a new administration comes into office. So what steps would you advise them to take to deal with these fuel problems?
The structural problem is that subsidies are reverse taxes. They distort the allocation of resources. It's in a cloud, so it's open to abuse. So no matter what you do, it will be abused. So the best thing to do is to get rid of it. And no better time to get rid of it than now, right? And secondly, Angola, a country like ours, oil producing and all that, got rid of this thing about a month ago. And ever since, things have been happening. in Ghana, in quite a few countries. But the point is that we need to understand that subsidies are not on consumption. Subsidies are actually on production. So if you shift it away and use those subsidies to support education and some other things, then we're all right. But what you must know is that salaries are being owed, contractors are being owed, importers are being owed, debt obligations are mounting. So the total amount of the subsidy is about 25% of our budget. You either keep the subsidies and continue owing everybody and disrupting things, or you get rid of the subsidies and pay off everybody, reflate the economy, create jobs, and build infrastructure. This perpetual parasitic system that we have, which leads to financial osmosis, where people are taking money from one sector and putting in the other, and nobody's getting anywhere. The country is grinding to a halt. It has ground to a halt, actually. And so something dramatic, something drastic has to happen to get rid of this awareness of this addiction to subsidies and addiction to an economy that depends on handouts.
All right, thank you very much for coming
Thank you,
on to the
Bimbo.
News at 10. I've been talking with Mr. Bismarck Rwani, an economist, about the fuel scarcity in the country. Well, fuel queues in and across the country are yet to thin out, despite the decision of oil unions and workers to return to work. Motorists who spoke to us say they can hardly wait for the truck drivers to begin the distribution of petroleum products.
By now, it's an all too familiar song to say that frustration and anger is now the order of the day as fuel scarcity continues to bite even harder. Vehicles and jerrycan queues are yet to disappear from petrol stations, despite the calling off of strike by oil marketers. Petrol prices hit the highest in the history of fuel scarcity in Nigeria, as black marketers sell a litre of product between 200 naira and 1,000 naira. In Oyo State, residents traveled long distances in search of the product, while commuters trekked distances after waiting at the bus stop with no sight of commercial vehicles. From over 30 petrol stations visited, only one had product, selling at 220 naira per litre. The situation
When the News at 10 returns, hope brightens for the emergence of Agriculture Minister Akinwumi Adesina as African Development Bank's president. That's on Business News. Please join us again.